Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here for the endowed lecture of the Committee on Women and Gender. I'm Stephanie Jensen-Moulton, and I'm pleased to announce that this is my last of 5 years chairing the Committee on Women and Gender. Oh, that came out wrong. No, it's been an honor over the last 5 years to chair this committee, and we've had some incredible endowed lecture speakers, including Tammy Kernodle and Reece, who's here today, Ellie Hissama, and many others who have been distinguished lecturers over the course of this past 5 years. We've also had some wonderful panels covering topics including professionalism, the idea of failure as generative, and many other topics that cover the gamut of the academic apparatus. But today, what I'd like to do is sort of, as Christy J put it, a cascade of introductions. So I'd officially like to hand over this invisible key to Christy J Wells, who is our new director. Let's give a round of applause, the new chair of the Committee on Women and Gender. Hooray, I'm so beyond thrilled. Christy J. Wells, they, is an associate professor of musicology in Arizona State University's School of Music, Dance, and Theater, and a Race, Arts, and Democracy Fellow with ASU's Center for the Study of Race and Democracy. She is an interdisciplinary scholar in the fields of jazz history, popular music studies, dance studies, and arts and cultural policy, as well as a practicing blues, authentic jazz, and Lindy Hop dancer for over 20 years. Their award-winning first book, Between Beats, The Jazz Tradition and Black Vernacular Dance, Oxford 2021, explores jazz music, social and popular dance, race, power, and discourse from the 19th century through the 21st century. She is currently working on her second book, a study of the Smithsonian Institution's substantial theory of jazz programming and patronage. And I couldn't be more thrilled that Christy J is also the first person who is a trans person to be in the chairpersonship of this committee. So, Christy J, you're totally awesome. Welcome to the committee chairpersonship, and you have the floor and the power.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Well, with that, let me say that can we please give Stephanie Jensen-Moulton our undying gratitude and a huge round of applause for all of her labor over the past 5 years stewarding this committee. SJM, you are also very awesome, and indeed it is not lost on me that the leadership of this committee is a long legacy of awesome feminist scholars in our field. I had a lovely moment with Judith Tick, who was one of the pioneers in founding this important committee last night, and we shared a great hug, and I am feeling that sense of lineage, and I'm very, very honored by it. As we honor the past of this committee, we also honor everything that's exciting about what we're going to do in the future, and that also means all of the exciting emerging scholars who are present in our field, including on our committee. So with that in mind, I'm going to introduce my colleague, who is then going to introduce our speaker for the day. So please allow me to introduce you all to Ramona Gonzalez. Ramona is a PhD candidate in musicology at UCLA. Her forthcoming dissertation, Why Sad Song? Women's Laments in Popular Music, aims to revitalize the study of women's lament, a musical expression central not only to the historical processing of grief, but also to female creativity. Gonzalez is a visiting professor at Occidental College in Los Angeles, where she teaches music production and industry. Gonzalez is also a singer, multi-instrumentalist, and producer. Since 2008, she has performed under the moniker Night Jewel. Seriously, y'all Google her and check out her music. You will not be disappointed. I have had a good time. For which she has received accolades from outlets such as Pitchfork, Rolling Stone, The New York Times, and The Guardian. Please welcome Ramona Gonzalez.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Dwandalyn R. Reece. Dr. Reece is a musician, scholar, and museum professional who has spent her entire career working in the public sector in the areas of history, culture, and the arts. in her role as Associate Director of the Humanities and former Curator of Music and Performing Arts at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, she is responsible for the acquisition, research, and interpretation of the museum's music and performing arts collection. Many of you have probably seen Musical Crossroads, the museum's permanent exhibition for which she received the Secretary's Research Prize. Dr. Reece also currently serves as chair of the pan-institutional group Smithsonian Music and was co-curator of the 2019 initiative, the Smithsonian Year of Music. Dr. Reece has collaborated on programs such as the 2016 National Museum of African American History and Culture Grand Opening Festival, Freedom Sounds, a community celebration, and the 2011 Folklife Festival program, Rhythm and Blues, Tell It Like It Is. Among many other projects, she is also working on the Smithsonian Anthology of Hip Hop and Rap in collaboration with Smithsonian Folkways. Her contribution to musical life in the United States extends to her service on the Society for American Music's Board of Directors as council chair and board member for the Society for Ethnomusicology. Dr. Reece also received the Society for Ethnomusicology's Public Sector Award in 2022. Before joining the Smithsonian, Dr. Reece was a senior program officer at the National Endowment for the Humanities and worked in several museums, including the Louis Armstrong House and Archives, the Brooklyn Historical Society, the New Jersey State Museum, and the Motown Historical Museum. Wow. Dr. Reece's lecture today is entitled My Life in Music, an Autoethnography of a Curator, made possible by the AMS Committee on Women and Gender. And now I am pleased to hand the microphone over to Dr. Reece.
Thank you. So thanks for being here. It's an honor to be asked to share some of my musings of what I hope to be a future book project of mine, titled My Life in Music, a Curator's Autoethnography. A couple of years ago, I came across a book titled Music Autoethnographies and was taken with the idea of exploring where the personal life and cultural experiences intertwined with creative work. Since I've been at the Smithsonian, I have spoken to numerous undergraduate and graduate students about my career as a curator, working outside academic spaces in the public sector. In the retellings of my own professional journey, I've identified a through line that shaped me personally and has influenced my work in the museum field, curating exhibitions and other projects for public audiences. In navigating spaces where I was told that I didn't belong or my voice wasn't to be heard, it dawned on me that this entire process, my career, my research, and my struggles to find a safe space to explore my own identity as a Black woman, was based on a rationale governed by my scholarly and professional choices. I could easily recount my career trajectory, but had I gone any deeper to understand the sociocultural forces that had influenced me? What motivated me to do the work I chose to do? And more importantly, how had those motivations contributed to the public discourse on American music? I decided that a critical reappraisal of my life in music is one way to figure out what that's all been about. So let me set the stage. I came of age, I'm not going to tell you my exact age, but after the pivotal breakthroughs of the civil rights movement. While my parents spent their formative years in the segregated communities of North Carolina, I was raised right here in the Rocky Mountain West in Denver, Colorado. Our experiences were going to be profoundly different. My generation was destined to test out this new social order of integration and equal opportunity, which was to be the foundation of a new America. The hopeful anticipation of civil rights legislation and the sacrifices and struggles of the movement was to pave a path to a new reality. However, just as there was no guidebook on what to do with newly freed Black men, women, and children in 1865, there was no template for the seismic shift we would have in race relations a century later. As we know all too well today, the moral imperatives that galvanized the civil rights movement spurred changes in legislation, but left out the political and economic structures of institutional racism and the harm it could inflict. My family arrived in Denver courtesy of the United States Air Force in 1969. My parents would soon divorce, and my mother, brother, and I settled into an East Denver neighborhood called Park Hill. It wasn't in the South or in an urban metropolitan area, but yes, as I was always asked as a child, there were Black people in Denver and a thriving Black community. Park Hill was a neighborhood once governed by restrictive covenants, but by the late 60s and 70s had acclimated itself to supporting an orderly integration of the area. The stressors of integration also spilled over into Denver's segregated schools. Rachel Knoll, a community leader and first African American on the Denver School Board, put forward a resolution in 1968 to integrate the city's school system. While the measure garnered some support, it failed at election time. Nevertheless, a subsequent lawsuit left it to the Colorado Supreme Court to mandate busing to integrate the schools. So I was on the cusp of living in a community outside a Black metropolis, but also integrating schools and figuring what that was all about. When I think about my earliest musical influences, I recall my grandmother giving me my first piano lessons, and more poignantly, my parents' record collection. Albums in the rotation included Simon and Garfunkel, The Fifth Dimension, Brooke Benton, Leontine Price, Dionne Warwick, Roberta Flack, and Joan Baez. It's fair to say that listening to those albums set the groundwork for some of my eclectical musical tastes. My first album was The Partridge Family. And if you don't know The Partridge Family, it was a show about a widowed mother and her 5 children who formed a singing group. I watched religiously every Friday night. In fact, in the era of 1970s television, any show or episode that had singing drew my interest, as I would sit very close to the TV and try to record performances with a small cassette recorder. That's cassettes, for those of you who may not know what that is. My musical enjoyment did not end with watching the show or merely listening to the album. In the basement, I would put on the Partridge Family album, set up a folded-up music stand as my microphone, take my tambourine in hand, and sing back up to David Cassidy's dulcet tones. I sang my heart out. Sometimes I would pretend to be Shirley Partridge singing co-lead on some tracks. Music was my respite and my favorite companion. As the top 40 evolved, so did my musical choices. My next favorite sing-along companion was Olivia Newton-John. I'd ride my bike to the Park Hill Library and check out cassettes of hers and other favorite artists. The songs seemed to fit my young voice, and I would follow the Grammys and the American Music Awards to catch glimpses or record performances of the artists of the day. Other artists that would make the rotation included the Jackson 5, Captain and Tennille, Melissa Manchester, and I could go on and on and on. I was blissfully in my own element with my music all the way through 6th grade when I sang Have You Never Been Mellow in the Phillips Elementary School talent show. My joyful bliss in pre-adolescence was about to have a rude awakening, however, once I transitioned to Smiley Junior High School. Given how much I enjoyed singing, it was a foregone conclusion that I would register for 7th grade choir. Even though Smiley was integrated due to the mandated busing, most of the students in choir were African American. As we met daily every 4th period, one day I finally got up the nerve to audition for a solo. We were going to do a choral version of Killing Me Softly with his song. I auditioned in front of the whole choir, and while the choir director, Ms. Schmidt, determined that I did well enough to earn the solo, I was told by several classmates that I had sounded like a white girl. The derision stung, and I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do with it. Accused of being something I was not, I didn't know how to navigate the questions and feelings those descriptions prompted. I ended up dropping choir the next semester, but was steered by the choir director to audition for the Colorado Children's Chorale. This time, my voice was not an albatross around my neck. I spent the next year being carpooled to rehearsals in South Denver to perform across the city and even in Wyoming. I sang for only a year after transportation to the midday rehearsals became too difficult for my mother to arrange. I continued on with my musical experience, but within the privacy of my own home, taking piano lessons, listening to records when I was home alone and to the radio. Still, I was looking for a place where I could express myself creatively and eventually found another outlet through theater. By the time I reached high school, we had moved to another neighborhood in Park Hill, across the tracks, so to speak. It was not as well integrated, and the change of location meant I was reverse bused with mostly white students to Manual High School, which is located near Denver's Five Points neighborhood, which is not too far from downtown. I tried choir again in high school, and while I loved our music teacher and I enjoyed being part of the ensemble, whenever I auditioned for solos, I continued to feel out of place. No one really knew what to do with me. My sound didn't match the soulful, melismatic cadences of my Black classmates, and I didn't have the cool factor because I wasn't from the local neighborhood. The one time when I did fit the bill was for a Christmas program where I was part of a duet for Oh Holy Night. Again, I concentrated on theater, taking on lead roles in such productions as You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, and playing Golda in Fiddler on the Roof. When I left for college, I returned to music full force and started studying voice at Scripps College. The music there was Western European classical traditions, and while I enjoyed the work I was doing and how I was growing as a vocalist, I yearned for a little bit more, something that spoke directly to me about my own music education. I started to explore music through the lens of American studies. Here, I could identify issues that dealt with the complexities of being American from a personal perspective. It turned out to be the process by which I could formally ask the questions and confront the issues that troubled me as a child. Although if you had asked me at that time what I was trying to do, I wouldn't have been able to articulate it. In 1985, I started graduate school at the University of Michigan, where I began to wrestle more directly with some of the questions that gnawed at me about my own musical identity. I enrolled in the American Culture program and quickly made my way to the School of Music. I took a large number of music classes, most frequently with musicologist Richard Crawford, where I pursued several independent study courses to explore the work of Joan Baez and the music of the civil rights movement. It was an expansive period where I was self-directed and discovered topics that resonated with me. In the interdisciplinary work I was doing, I started questioning whether the academy was the place for me. My whole sense of myself and the world was growing as a result of my education, and I wanted to do something with it that would have a broad impact. That was when Michigan's museum practice program caught my eye. What would it be like to apply my interest in music in museums? I was attracted to the idea of not limiting myself to the academy and developing exhibits and programs for broad audiences. Could that possibly be a career for me? It turned out that it would, but before I discuss how that came to be, I want to return back to my ongoing struggles with my vocal identity. In my later work, I've learned that there is a widespread tendency to superimpose racial identity on the voice along with musical genres. And for many years, my own encounters with this left me struggling to understand the sense of alienation I felt when I was accused or celebrated as sounding white. Throughout adolescence and early adulthood, I was constantly on the lookout for role models who looked and sounded like me. There was always a sense of tension between what people expected of me and the eclecticism of my own vocal style, musical tastes, and sensibilities. In my early 20s, when I was at Michigan, I discovered something about myself that would fundamentally change the way I understood music. I was still at Michigan, and I was taking a course with Richard Crawford called the Jazz Core Repertory. One of the assignments was to listen and analyze different versions of the same song. I went through several songs, but eventually selected Hoagy Carmichael's Georgia on My Mind. After listening to several versions, including the definitive 1960 Ray Charles recording, I came across one by a vocalist that immediately sparked a moment of recognition. In my listening, the timbre of her voice and her stylistic choices reminded me of my own, and having internalized the outside assumptions about my own vocal sound, I imagined the singer as a white female. Curious about her, I did a little more research, only to learn that the singer was Ethel Waters, who happened to be Black. I went back to the recording and played it repeatedly. Where were the clues? What hadn't I figured this out? And more importantly, why did it matter? And I'm going to play a little bit of that recording of Ethel Waters on Georgia on My Mind. Get to the vocal a little bit.
Georgia, Georgia, the whole day through. Just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. Georgia on my mind. Georgia, Georgia, a song of you comes as sweet and clear as moonlight through the pine.
It wasn't my discovery of Waters that was the revelation, but the biases I had used to assess her voice. Having spent years internally resisting the labels that had been imposed on me, I was surprised to find that I had taken these same preconceptions as my own. I realized that the inclination to classify a voice had more to do with social and cultural constructions about race than it did with individual artistry, style, and technique. Comments like the ones I experienced as a child, whether they were intended to be praise or criticism, always struck a nerve because they relayed the message that people did not hear or see me as an individual, but as a reflection of their own expectations. When we tie a given vocal performance or sound to a particular race, we ignore the role our own biases play in defining a sound. This apparent disconnect between the sounds we associate with the type of race body is something that is projected by the listener and not the singer herself. A little bit about Ethel Waters. She began performing around 1917 and professionally came of age in the 1920s during the era of the female Black blues singers. Their songs spoke to their personal experiences as Black women and took on a ritual significance in the Black community as expressive channels of shared beliefs and experiences. Through their individual recordings and performances on the Black vaudeville circuit, theaters, and tent shows, these women served as a prototype for Black feminism. The most celebrated of these performers was Bessie Smith, whose vocal power and texture, emotional delivery, and command of the blues idiom reshaped the vocal stylings of popular music. Waters did not have the range, volume, or texture of Smith's voice, but she did manage to win over audiences with, in her words, her own unique style. As she wrote in her autobiography, His Eye is in the Sparrow, "I would sing St. Louis blues, but very softly. It was the first time that kind of Negro audience let my kind of low singing get by. For years they had been used to Bessie Smith and Ma Rainey. They loved them and all the other shouters. I could always riff and jam and growl, but I never had that loud approach." Waters understood singers and how to capitalize on the unique qualities of her voice. Marrying her bell-like tone, she described it, with precise enunciation, inventive phrasing, vocal characterization, and a penchant for storytelling, as well as the rhythmic sensibilities and timing of Black musical traditions, her creative sensibilities had broadened her public appeal. By the mid-1930s, she was one of the most popular entertainers in the country. However, in the pantheon of influential vocalists, Waters is frequently treated as a footnote. While she may not have had the biggest voice, she did challenge sonic racial barriers in popular music through her artistic choices and vocal sound. What becomes of the Black female singer whose musical identity and style defies categorization? The frameworks through which these voices are heard and remembered are particularly oppressive. Racialized perceptions of Black female singers rob them of their agency and their ability to occupy multiple spaces by reducing their identities to ideals about Blackness, whiteness, and femininity. And those who don't embody the standards of Black musical authenticity in their sound frequently fall out of favor in contemporary reappraisals of their careers. The story of a Black female singer is often equated with the tragic suffering figure who represents the story of centuries of racial oppression, struggle, and fighting for survival. Her counterpart is a maternal figure whose warm and comforting presence resonates with a calm, uplifting spirit. Implicit in both narratives, or in their erasure, are biases against those whose voice does not reflect the deep reservoir of pain, passion, and raw emotion that Black music is supposed to epitomize. Many historical narratives diminish the importance of Waters' cultural influence. Despite her artistic talents, she is, ironically, overshadowed because her broad popular appeal signified a less authentically Black performance style. As listeners, we are indoctrinated to understand musical genres and styles along racial lines. Assessments framed in the terms of authenticity versus marketability and black versus white in sound are frequent in writing about popular music, so much so that it's easy to assume that the two are necessarily aligned. When we attribute a vocal quality as belonging to one race, we not only ignore the singer's own artistic choices, but the way our own biases shape how and what we hear. In doing so, we form opinions about meaning and the intention of the vocalist that frequently lead to judgments about historical value, censure, or cultural erasure. Critics, scholars, and fans are frequently caught up in the idea of an ideal black sound. In her book, The Race of Sound, Listening, Timbre, and Vocality in African American Music, Nina Edsheim explores how the tone and color of the singing voice is used as a measure of racial identity. For instance, the fact that someone would identify a singer as sounding white reflects the observation, real or imagined, that the singer is not white and that her voice does not align with her racial identity. This conversation plays out frequently in conversations about musical style, performance, and vocal sound. This sonic color line, as Jennifer Lynn Stover describes it, is a powerful force in perpetuating the values of white supremacy and anti-black racism. The sonic color line is the process of racializing sound, how and why certain bodies are expected to produce, desire, and live amongst particular sounds, resulting in a racial hierarchy between whiteness and blackness. The impact of this racialized listening is that it puts pressure on the individual listening ear to affirm the sonic color line's classifications. So listening is a powerful tool in identity construction and community formation. The instability posed by the race body and indeterminate sound complicates the listener's experience to the point that the listener who interprets sounds within the framework of the sonic color line is not responding to the voice per se, but their own expectations about what she is supposed to hear. As Edsheim explains, listening is not neutral. When we tie a given vocal performance or a sound to a particular race, we ignore the role our own biases play in defining music. This apparent disconnect between the sounds we associate with the race body is something that is projected by the listener and not the singer itself. I wanted to get back to Ethel Waters, if I could. In her book, Blues Legacies and Black Feminisms, Angela Davis discusses Waters for the purpose of positioning Bessie Smith as a superior, more authentic black artist. She writes, "To unschooled white ears, as well as to successful black people who did not particularly relish musical reminders of their own social roots, Ethel Waters may have appeared to be the most accomplished blues singer of the period. But as is universally recognized today, Bessie Smith was the real genius at her craft. She was not only the greater artist, she also more accurately represented the socio-historical patterns of black people's lives." Davis goes on to describe how Waters' sound was a calculated product and therefore less authentic. Ethel Waters' sophisticated sound was a cultural production of urbanization that rapidly was transforming the black community and enticing those who were susceptible to the illusions of assimilation. Ethel Waters found receptive audiences outside the African American cultural context, from the northern white population to European royalty. While Bessie Smith performed before ethnically integrated and sometimes predominantly white audiences, she did not feel the need to alter either her material or her mode of presentation. Whether Ethel Waters' brand of entertainment was aesthetically and historically faithful to the Black American culture she professed to transmit to her white audiences is arguable. I believe Davis' comments project an essentialist notions of what constitutes a black sound and positions Waters as a foil to the more authentic artists. Waters admitted herself that she did not have Bessie Smith's expressive power or vocal range. Does that make her vocal performance any less relevant? And if so, by whose criteria are such judgments being made? These are questions that date back as well as far as the 19th century. In a chapter on the black concert vocalist, Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield and her more renowned contemporary, the white soprano Jenny Lind, Jennifer Lynn Stover shows how the print media, in describing the skills and talents of both artists, shaped the listening ear by detailed descriptions that tied vocal tones and styles to essential notions of racial identity. Listeners, black and white, fall into this common trap. It is an attempt to fix an aesthetic style and expression as a static, unadulterated state. But from its inception, African American performance has been anything but that. Is a black performer's artistic expression required to have some type of socio-political purpose? And if it does not, is that artist's work less creative, significant, or authentic? Waters' natural voice, the environment in which she was raised, and how she developed her own sonic identity have been victims of such thinking. Waters understood singers and how to capitalize on the unique qualities of her own voice. Her creative sensibilities earned her broad public appeal. And while she became one of the most popular entertainers of her day, she's frequently treated as a footnote and continued to challenge audiences at the time and into the present day about the expectations of artistic choices in sound. I'm going to digress again because I'm very fascinated by this theme, not only because of my own vocals, my struggles with my own vocal identity, and I'll get to how this kind of ties into my worldview and how it does my curatorial work, but for other artists as well. So here's another example that has piqued my interest. This is a group called The Fifth Dimension. The original incarnation was from 1965. I'm saying this for those of you who may not know who they are. This is a copy of Ebony magazine, published by Johnson Publishing Company. Ebony was widely known for chronicling all areas of Black life, including politics, civil rights activism, entrepreneurship, sports, music, and entertainment. The publishers also devoted space to in-depth reporting on issues and current debates that spoke to concerns of the Black community. In the publisher's statement, founder John H. Johnson wrote that Ebony was founded to project all dimensions of the Black personality in a world saturated with stereotypes. So here on this cover, we have the fifth dimension, and if you can read in the bottom, it says the fifth dimension, white sound in a Black group. So much for about the stereotypes. This October 1967 issue features the 5 original members, Ron Townsend, Florence LaRue, Billy Davis Jr., Marilyn McCoo, and Lamont McLemore. They're pictured beaming, clapping, and dancing on the cover in patriotic red, white, and blue ensembles. The 6-word subtitle, as I read, is White Sound in a Black Group. This headline indicates how Ebony's staff contextualized the contested idea of a Black sound for their readership within other cultural happenings. Inside the magazine, the cover story describes the Fifth Dimension as one of the hottest and vocally most unusual acts in show business, while noting they had, quote, no brown sound in most of their work released to date. Questioning the authenticity of some Black musicians was common in publications such as Ebony, especially when musicians subverted essentialist notions of how they should sound and presented their own identity through their music. Ebony's coverage characterized the questions that circulated around the Fifth Dimension at that time. The Fifth Dimension's success as a middle-of-the-road pop group confused and troubled the sonic color line. Once the group had its first big hit with Jimmy Webb's Up, Up, and Away, industry executives didn't know quite what to do with them, and Black audiences questioned their Black identity. Listeners not only categorized voices, but also construct a genealogy around voices that serves to affirm or contradict sentiments of racial belonging. This was not lost on members of the group. If you notice, if you happen to see the Summer of Soul documentary that came out a couple of years ago, Marilyn McCoo and Billy Davis were both interviewed, and they were one of the acts to be featured in the Harlem Cultural Festival in 1969. And they talk about how honored they were because they didn't feel like they belonged. And McCall is quoted as saying, "Our voices sound the way they sound. How do you color a sound?" And so just so you can hear what they sound like, here's a little excerpt of Up, Up, and Away.
Like to ride in my beautiful, like to ride in my beautiful, we can but we can fly. Up and away, my beautiful mother. The world's a nicer place than my beautiful blue. Well, the nicer place than my beautiful blue. And sing a song and sail along the silver sky, but we can fly.
You can judge for yourself. So what would it take to see and hear the voice as a symbol of agency and a vehicle of liberation, no matter what the sound, whether it's me auditioning for the 7th grade choir, or Ethel Waters singing in the classic blues tradition, or the Fifth Dimension, or other artists many artists we can talk about today. The tension for many Black listeners living within the context of white supremacy is the celebration of individual achievement versus an allegiance to one's community and cultural expression and political solidarity. True liberation requires both, but at what expense? And more importantly, how is agency and freedom actualized on a personal and collective level? These conversations about authenticity, music, and about what bodies can produce what sounds needs to evolve. As Stover writes, the foundations for a decolonizing listening practice, one capable of consciously stripping away destructive internalizations of the listening ear's filter, revaluing sounds damaged by its interpretations, and amplifying them toward liberatory ends. Listening is an interpretive cultural practice governed by historically contingent and culturally specific value systems. It is only by decolonizing the listening ear that agency and freedom can be understood, experienced, and expressed through auditory perception. A full transformation in the way we listen will make the singing voice immune to racialization and reaffirm the innate complexity, agency, and creative autonomy that embodies any human sound. What I internalized of the criticism or praise of what my voice symbolized to others was not connected to who I was, but what people expected me to be. It deprived me of my authentic sense of self as it tried to contain me. I've come to notice that I have resisted this narrative for a lifetime, even as I had not realized how it was summoned to form a sense of resistance in my own research and professional work. I've been intent on ensuring that there is space for multiple narratives and that individual voices that are equally assigned value in public and scholarly discourse. Now, thinking about that and how I got into museum work, as part of the museum practice program I participated in at Michigan, I had to do an academic internship at the Smithsonian. It was during this time when the Smithsonian had acquired the Duke Ellington collection. And as an intern, I was one of those people who got to go into the box and just pull out awards, photos and musical items out of the boxes, handling them and observing them without the intermediary of an archivist. That's a pleasant experience, if I do say so myself. And not that archivists are bad, but when you have that direct connection with an object, it's really powerful. But that's where I found my niche for loving research and using objects to tell stories, as we say in the museum world. But I was also motivated to engage in a dialogue with audiences and represent music in a way that opens lines of communication, brings hidden and forgotten voices to the forefront, and espouses principles of accomplishment and survival against the odds within a social justice framework. When I joined the National Museum of African American Culture in 2009 as its curator of music and performing arts, I was greeted with an opportunity to shape a narrative that included my worldview. I purposely wanted to set aside racial essentialisms in talking about Black music and embraced a concept called African American music making or musicking, however you want to call it, as an organizing concept. This way I could be comprehensive in the way that was inclusive of different genres and styles and people. I know now that what influenced my approach was my own struggles with my own vocal identity and feeling pigeonholed and on the outskirts or marginalized because of that racial identity. I was not interested in and fought against the whole concept of categorizing the culture in the same ways. I have, throughout my career, fought against this kind of categorization and the assumptions that people have. And I've seen that that through line has pushed and allowed me to say other things about the culture of music making. When I had an opportunity to build a collection, we knew what people would generally think about when they talked about Black music: jazz, gospel, R&B, and hip hop. But there were so many other stories to tell, and that was a personal mission of mine. That larger story of African American music making, which is really much more inclusive than anything else because of the breadth, depth, growth, and development of music culture in the United States. This music, African American music, has a 400+ year history, having been created from every part of the country in every genre, using every innovation, while speaking to the world not only through a performance lens, but also as a socio-cultural ecosystem of communities that bring music to life as a self-sustaining component of our daily lives. My work as a curator is also about identity, community, and social justice. The full picture, no matter the genre, is what I want to communicate to audiences. That's the philosophy I bring to this work. What then is the landscape? What is important about the history that this museum has to tell? What I like about the work that I've done at the museum is that I've expanded that framework and expanded the narrative and brought those voices that are marginalized because they don't fit notions of social protest or don't fit the common themes that are talked about music more generally. I have had my share of therapy, and it has taken decades to deconstruct how my childhood experiences have shaped my life, personal and the professional. Nevertheless, the struggles and questions that fed the self-doubt of my early years empower me today. I don't feel alienated by my own voice anymore. Whether I'm singing or forging my own path and doing the work that is meaningful to me, the shame and embarrassment that I used to feel has given way to a stubborn sense of resolve to advocate for the narratives that have remained hidden, unrecognized, or undervalued. If I were to create a personal mission statement about what I've wanted my work to accomplish, they would include 3 bullets. Elevate those persons and topics that lie on the margins of the dominant discourse about Black music and American music more broadly. Create spaces for multiple identities, shying away from essentialist methodologies that restrict ways of being and lead to erasure, and champion public musicology and applied work as a radical intervention influencing the public's understanding and engagement with music. I look forward to excavating the past to see how it has influenced me today, and thank you for letting me share just a small piece of my journey. Thank you.
Dwan, thank you so much for this talk and indeed for all of the work that you do. I wanted to ask you about the place you were kind of advocating for Ethel Waters against the grain of what Angela Davis had to say about her. And I guess my question is, since that project of Angela Davis is about highlighting these pioneering blues women as models for Black feminism and what it is and how it works, I'm just wondering if you have thoughts on what implications it would have for how we understand Black feminism and its tie to blues women and blues legacies to integrate Ethel Waters more fully into that picture.
Thanks, Christy J, for that question. I think one of the things I advocate and argue for is a multiplicity of identities. I think Angela Davis's comments and in other treatments of the Black female blues singers forget to look at Black feminism and Black women as a monolith, and it's a form of cultural erasure at the same time. And so I'm advocating for a different way of perceiving singers and giving agency to them, not only through the lens of social protest or Black authenticity. I talk a little bit, and I didn't talk about it here, the whole notion of resistance and how the narrative of scholarship on Black music, we talk about the protests and social agency. There's also resistance with a little r. And you look at the career of Ethel Waters and other artists, I'm trying to carve out a place for them because they're totally marginalized. And that is part of my mission, to bring them back into the fold and complicate the way that we define our identities. And it's all part of that intersectionality. We can't have it just one way and not the other.
Hi. Okay, sorry. Thank you so much for this paper. I really appreciated it as someone who's also been working with performers who don't necessarily sing or perform in a way that's considered like part of this larger monolithic tradition, but that I think are definitely engaging with it, and that erasing that in a lot of ways ignores the fact that like Black creativity and music is the foundation for like basically all American art. And so getting away from that in any sort of perspective or trying to sort of elide those nuances ends up ignoring a lot of the like greater contributions. This reminded me a lot of like Maureen Mahon's chapter on like the chorales and girl groups and that like larger sort of sound. And I was wondering, because figuring out theoretical frameworks is always fun, just kind of like how you are foreseeing like sort of approaching talking about this in future scholarship, maybe outside even just popular music, but talking about, you know, Black artists and performers who are in areas that are not necessarily engaging with what Davis would recognize as the same blues traditions, but who are calling back to like their own legacy and their own communities.
Sure. It's kind of a liberation model. I mean, I think when you think about Black music and African American culture, you know, that freedom quest looms large, and that's the way that it gets defined in a lot of scholarship and popular discourse about the music. I'm arguing for an individual sense of liberation and sense of agency, that we don't make judgments on artists because of their political inclinations or whether their music changed society in some way. I'm really arguing for, as much as the Black music is about the communal, that liberatory tendency is also about the individual. The categorization, the classification of boxes. These are individual people who are trying to break through. You think about Prince when he was the symbol. And artists of all walks of life. This is a common denominator. I mean, I think things have changed over the last 30 years. We have artists who are very fluid in their musical influences, and they've always been the case, but we've never talked about them in that way. I mean, I think the exhibit is kind of designed in that way. It's open, and we have divisions of genres just because we had to. I didn't want to, but we had to, because people recognize that. But they're also feeding off of each other. And so this is a freedom exercise for me. Freedom to be heard, freedom, right to be who you are, and the freedom to engage those narratives as part of the larger project. And so you might have to shift. I mean, I don't know where it goes. I just know that I'm fascinated with the topic, and how it ties to me personally. It gives it a little certain kind of emphasis, because I can feel it in my bones and what that constraint really feels like in trying to do in my own work, and to overcorrect in my collecting and what I do at the museums to reach audiences from abroad, you know, their own dialogues about music. And so that's what I hope to do. I don't know if that really answers your question, but.
Hello, Dewan. Thank you for a wonderful, wonderful talk and very self-revealing. There are two things that really struck me. One, what you were just saying about freedom and self-determination, self-definition, and then when we're talking about Angela Davis and this concept, and and you also mentioned this word genre. Because one of the things that has always struck me is who defines these terms and who comes up with these genres. For example, Tony Thomas, the banjoist, who, and also one of my relatives, for whom, of the older generation, I've got a 100-year-old cousin, for whom the word blues was just a secular song, as opposed to defining a genre of the 12-bar blues when you do this and AABD and all that. It's just secular music as opposed to sacred. And then you also mentioned R&B, and I'm looking at this ebony cover when the whole question of black popular music, a la Berry Gordy and Motown, and this question, I don't want to use the word assimilationist, but expanding the notion of what black music was and the marketability, intersecting with sort of the capitalist project. So going back to this term R&B, which is a term that was coined by a white journalist, as well as sort of how this term blues becomes kind of slippery versus the origination of the term. So this is what I'm asking, your commentary given on this notion of you as a singer engaging in the process of self-explanation, self-determination, when you're up against sort of these definitions of genre that are contested yet and partly originating in sort of a white journalistic context. And then you get this strange feedback loop of black musicians in the community embracing this term as a term that then begins to define them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes without saying genre is socially constructed and racial hierarchy. And so much of this feedback loop. And that's why I really like the work that I've been reading about the listener and how they construct and define artists, that it is imposed upon and it is part of the language. Even look at the coverage of Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield in the newspapers. They've already set the codes, or how they frame her against Jenny Lind and how they define her as an artist, taking away her femininity and just describing her as a black sound. It is socially constructed, but it's also something you contest with all the time because it exists, it's there, and we operate by it. We don't have another language to talk about it. When I said by choice I didn't want to do genres, I really didn't. Director said I had to because I wanted to mix things up. I wanted to upset the apple cart. I wanted people to approach music just as a musical piece. But, at the Smithsonian, you give people what they don't know, but you also give them something they know. And genre is a construct that we talk about, we know, we're familiar with. The music industry, it continues to this day. But I'm all for contesting it and trying to deconstruct it. It's a much larger project than this one project or anything else. It's really changing the infrastructure of how music has been talked about and consumed in the United States and globally to much of a degree.
Hello, thank you so much for this amazing presentation. I was really struck by what you said at the end about your curatorial process, and I think there's a little naive piece of me that likes to believe music has some sort of resonance curatorially where maybe other objects don't. Speaking from my own work as a part-time curatorial intern at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West, so nothing huge, but we would work with wagon jacks from the 1880s, right? Not everybody has a wagon jack from the 1880s in their house, but most people have music in their house somewhere. And I was wondering if you could speak about where you've been able to see the most innovative uses of music as object in your own work to help move the public from kind of these false narratives that do get constructed about the racialization of sound, about the gendering of sound, to kind of this deep critical thinking about how we consume, particularly popular music. How are museums as institutions able to use music as an object in really innovative ways, and what are your favorite ways you've seen that play out?
Sure. I think one of the ways and one of the other interests I have is the material culture of African American music, or music more broadly. As far as the exhibit, one of the you can tell different narratives in a museum. You only get 75 words. That's kind of hard to work with. But one of the things we did try to do is that there are going to be millions of visitors who are going to know a Motown artist or who's going to know James Brown or Ray Charles, but they're not going to know what traveling on the Chitlin circuit was like, or what their childhoods were like, or what the business practices they have to understand. And so what is so important, and I think about the work and what I'm doing in educating public audiences, is that social and cultural context. I mean, so much of what I wanted to do, I've talked about a different type of musical literacy, something that goes beyond the performed piece and the performer. It's just like you can like a Black artist, but you can't like Black people, that kind of thing. And so it is painting a picture that puts the work, the art, the communities in this context, so you show how their influences are shaped by being Black in the United States. What helps in our museum is that our exhibits within the context of all our other 12 galleries. So you get the history of slavery and freedom, the history of era of segregation and changing America. So you have all that backdrop against you when entering the exhibit and interpreting those particular stories. I think music is particularly powerful. I mean, I'm not the expert in the room. Anybody can walk in and know something about know more about a given artist or theme than I do, and they will let you know. Definitely will let you know. And that's part of the thing of being a curator. I have the professional title and I do the job, but music is accessible to everybody and everybody has a personal relationship to it. And that personal relationship evokes nostalgia, memories, and their own identity about where they were at a certain time. And so it really has that power to draw people in from a personal perspective. And, I think about the work I've done in the museum as an exhibit, and I've gone a little deeper. I just had a book published in March called Musical Crossroads, The Story of the Objects of African American Music. And really what I'm trying to do is to posit material culture as a primary source for musicologists and ethnomusicologists, instead of getting beyond using archives as a way as illustrating an idea, but using them as a source for conducting research. And that is a wealth of information that is yet to be explored. I'm very excited about that book, but it's how I think about objects and how I think about music really as an ecosystem of concentric circles thriving off of each other and living in society.
Thank you so much for this beautiful paper and or this beautiful piece, essay, beginning of a book, and I want to hear more. I want to hear all the way to the end, and so I look forward to reading it. I was just so saddened to hear your story about being silenced by this one comment that the person probably never thought about again, and that had such a profound effect on your life, and how sensitive our voices are, and our voices as women. I know personally that I always spoke in a much lower voice than I really had as a young woman trying to be a professor in a man's world. I was the only woman professor there in my work environment. And it wasn't until I met a singer who said, "You're not using your correct voice. You're using a voice that's about an octave lower." And that meant so much to me. It really kind of changed my life. And we talk with our students about finding their voice in their writing and hearing their real and authentic identity in the writing that they do in our classes. And so I guess my question for you is, as you worked with that and struggled with that for a long time, it sounds like, and you touched on this, but I'd like to hear more about how you came to find your authentic voice as a singer, and how you came to identify with it, and how you might describe that identity, that vocal identity. I would just like to hear more about that, please.
Yeah, part of that identity it's come from study and the work I've done in the field, vocal study, having more role models and seeing more people who move beyond genres and vocal stylings, and whether you're black or white. It's been a lifelong process, really asserting that voice and not feeling judged by what I do. I've discovered new things about my voice. I mean, I had no chest voice to name of, and I've learned how to sing. I can do lower parts now. And that brings a certain different kind of gravitas to my voice in the literature that I can perform. But it's also a process of self-discovery in my own research. As I research artists and come across individuals who have not voices like my own, but voices that don't fit any kind of narrow kind of criteria. And I get emboldened by learning their stories. So this has really been a process of self-discovery. And even just this project itself, I'm thinking about my career in new ways to see what those motivations, those personal motivations that have driven me to make the choices I do and the decisions I do and what I advocate for, within the museum, outside the museum, within the scholarly walls, what have you. But I see this really strong connection between the two.
Thank you for that. This talk is so interesting. And so I wanted to ask a question that's kind of an inverse reading of your frame. And so, excuse me if it's not terribly clear, but I'll try my best. I'm interested in what this frame might do for artists that have fit within the racial frames quite comfortably. Artists like maybe Jimi Hendrix or Aretha Franklin or Stevie Wonder or Bessie Smith, in the sense that it might also as well give them a more nuanced voice within that frame. I'm thinking of an article, and I can't remember who wrote it, where he was analyzing a performance of Jimi Hendrix and felt there were moments where Jimi was doing things because they were kind of gestures that were just typical of what he should be doing. It didn't look authentic, even though the gesture itself fit within the frame. So I'm wondering about, that's a kind of a inverse. Instead of looking to the fringe, it's like taking a theory on the fringe and then looking into the center to see if new voices or new multiplicities of voices emerge within a monolithic voice that's been created. And as a part of that, I was wondering, this moment when you were unboxing Ellington's works, Ellington's objects, I wonder if there was a moment when you unearthed I wonder what object maybe sort of triggered you to start thinking of Ellington differently, rather than maybe within a more traditional racial frame. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I like the inverse, and I think one of the things we can do with artists who might fit the boxes is give them those multiplicity of identities. They're no different. Bessie Smith is no different than Ethel Waters. They have a different sound. But Bessie Smith was influenced by a lot of things, and we need to talk about that as much as we talk about her socio-political worldview and her music and how it reflects the culture. When did I start to talk about artists differently? I think one of the things is working with a collection. When you have a collection like that where you can see multiple sides of an individual, you see them more than just a musician. I think that's something I carry onto my work when I talk with potential donors. I'm saying I'm really interested in the three-dimensional person. I don't just want to see the Grammy Awards or music manuscripts. Who is this person as a person? What are the letters? Who are the family members? Where were they raised? And I think it gets back to that multiplicity of identities, that we are an amalgam of all these things. And our scholarship should reflect that and not necessarily narrow it down to fit one particular narrative. And I think that just really opens the door. So part of that being in the museum environment and being able to work with the collection without the archivist, directly, just being able to browse those things and read through letters and correspondence, and it's just a wonderful experience. And if you get that and get a collection like that to work with, you really start to think about your subject matter in a very different way.
Hi, thank you. We spoke briefly before the lecture itself, and I wanted to say thank you very much for that personal talking as well too. But the lecture itself, and also working on ladies' comments over here about voice, I had almost kind of an inverse experience, and I didn't know how cathartic or how changing it was until the questions that you started to ask yourself, Dr. Reece. So I guess what I'm saying is that there's been very permission-giving to just go down the thought processes, not into rabbit holes, but just what's coming up. So the inverse was, and I'm even doing it right now, is that I was told that my voice was too low for a girl. And I never had a head voice. I was always a head walking around based on traumas, but I had a disconnect between it all. And I've always had to present myself as a little bit more feminine and a little bit more less bold. And I just wanted to say thank you very much, because my voice is very comfortable, very low. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you. I want to start by thanking you for your presentation. It's been really interesting to see somebody in your position. So it's a position of power at the head of an institution, a section of an institution. And even though you are in this position, you have like an attitude of vulnerability. So really letting your life and your, I would say, subjectivity guide your curatorial work. I think you had a lot of courage to do that, and it's really something that it's very enriching, I think. So thank you for this. And my question is about the reception of the audience. So what did you notice about your way of presenting the materials? Were you able to collect feedback? What feedback? So that's my question. Thank you.
On this particular paper, or as a singer, or as
in the museum, in your collections, and the way you show them?
I haven't had feedback. Actually, what's going on at this very moment, there's a grad student from the University of Maryland that's doing an ethnographic survey of the exhibit as his dissertation project. So I'm very excited to hear what that feedback. There's been no formal evaluation. I have been very interested, because when we develop the exhibition script, you think about goals and what you want people to get out of it. And I don't know, people seem to enjoy the exhibit, but I want to know if they get some of the subtleties of it, the narratives we're trying to tell. Do they start to make connections beyond just a favorite artist or a favorite record that they have? And if they've done a little bit of that, then I feel like I've achieved some kind of success, because I'm upping the cultural musical literacy of our visitors in a way that they can spread that on. And if they want to know more, I think one of my favorite places in the exhibition is called the Neighborhood Record Store. And I knew that I wanted to do that from the outset. And what I like about it is combining the old school record store, so that communal environment, but it's become really cross-generational. There's a touch table, and you can play music, and people talk about it and bring their own examples, and there's additional information, there's a timeline, and that really has been a successful space experientially. because so much of our enjoyment in music is solo with our little earbuds and things like that. And so I'm just reminding people of the subtleties, like the things that we all understand as music scholars. But, you know, I'm communicating with the general public, and I want them to see that value just as much as we do.
I don't know if these questions are even relevant to your work, but I found your talk so enlightening, and I have so many questions that I had to narrow it down from like 10 to 2.
Okay.
So I'm gonna try to keep this brief, but I'm really fascinated by the idea of autoethnography and oral histories, and so I'm thinking about, in working with primary sources and with you know, what you must have come across as letters and writings and other people's mail and things that fascinate me like that. How do you qualify or identify artists who forcibly don't want to be identified in a particular group? I'm thinking of my colleague Tanya Leon, who does not want to be part of any kind of group like women composers or artists from Cuba, or she really doesn't want to be qualified in any kind of group. And how do you, as a curator, kind of handle those sorts of identities? And in a way, where do you put them as a curator? If they really, as a person, don't want to be part of any of those groups in discussions like this. And my secondary question is about kind of the aesthetics of the Black voice and its beauty, and you know, as a person yourself, and then as a curator, where does that kind of fall in this work? And again, thank you. This talk was just my AMS dream come true. So thank you.
Yeah, I've always been a proponent of letting people define themselves. Does become awkward when you're trying to accomplish something within an exhibition and you want to propose a narrative to make a point or to educate people, but that person does not see him or herself that way. I would, whoa. I would try to respect that as much as possible. And in that case, I would go with the way that person describes him or themselves. I haven't had to, you know, there's some people don't like, I mean, we take a license, I guess, but I would try to respect that in a creative way. Not necessarily by genre, but a thematic way of talking about artists, because I think that message is very clear. There are people who do not want to be, they don't see themselves as part of boxes. They don't, you know, there are people who want to be in an African American museum and not want to be in the American History Museum, and vice versa. Those allegiances. And I think talking about that and why they feel that way is just as important message as lumping them in or trying to make some kind of point. And your second question, refresh my memory, I just had a blip, about aesthetics. Yeah, aesthetics are kind of difficult because they can also be really coded in the language and how you describe them. So I find myself in those traps. I think in an exhibit, I struggle with that. I mean, you use live musical examples, but defining what you actually mean when you say, I mean, defining a Black sound, you know, you're not going to get me. I mean, they're essentialist notions of what that can be. So that's the whole purpose of why I have the knee-jerk reaction that I do. But if you get to the elements and the qualities of the voice and use language that is not racially coded, which is very difficult because everything is, I experiment with that, but I struggle with that myself. So not a solution, but.
Well, I guess I had one last question, if I can, which is, You know, you mentioned Ethel Waters as someone on the margins that you were able to elevate through this project. And I wondered if maybe you could just describe maybe one more artist on the margins who you feel very proud of being able to feature and exhibit.
Ethel Waters, Fifth Dimension. I'm trying to think. I think there are a host of, I mean, in my area, I'm really big on the Harlem Renaissance and artists of those types. I think, I'm going to throw out something, maybe challenge, but I think a vocalist like Diana Ross is on the margins in some way. When you talk, we know her about Motown and the Supremes and her but we don't talk about her as an artist or a vocalist. And you listen to Diana Ross, how do you describe her sound? What does she fit? And where does she fit in those narratives? That's the one person we haven't had these kind of conversations about. So I'll throw that out there. And let somebody take that on.
I love that. Okay, let's give one more round of applause for Dr. Dwandalyn Reece.
Thank you.